The drama, cue the violin. That's what we were missing out on as they walked out. It was a bit of a calm walkout. I would have expected some singing and dancing and clapping. You'll remember some of the pre-election broadcasts that we had where we went throughout South Africa just profiling what people wanted on the ground. We did have EFF on more than one occasion. I remember being the presenter in one or two of them and having them singing and dancing and clapping hands. So I'm a little disappointed that there wasn't much funfair. But a walkout nonetheless, yes. And before anybody else walks out, let's quickly speak to Ms. Lindiwe Zulu from the ANC. She's in one of the communication sectors there with regards to the ruling party. So lest she also walks out on me, I don't know, maybe it was something I said. Maybe it's my cologne today. But before she walks out on us, let's quickly get her response. A very good morning to you, Mama. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to everybody and good morning to the listeners. I can assure you we have absolutely no intention of walking out of anything because we believe that South Africa deserves better than that. South Africa deserves this debate that we are having today. As the African National Congress, of course, we've already thanked the people of South Africa for coming up overwhelmingly and voting the African National Congress and voting in the different directions that they wanted to vote. We thank that. Secondly, we also thank the fact that relatively the elections were very peaceful, free and fair. And for some of us who travel around the world, we know what it is to get into space where elections are not free and fair. What is important for the African National Congress is that the people of South Africa have spoken. That's what is important for us. We've gone back to the drawing board already. We are not wasting any time because we believe that any loss of anyone who did not vote for us is something that we have to concern ourselves with. Gone back to the drawing board, we'll be looking at each and every VD of South Africa, the voting station, looking at the results. As an African National Congress, we should be concerned when we lose, and we are concerned when we lose where we lost. We will put everything we can in our power to go back to those people that did not vote the African National Congress to say to them, you've given us, the ones that have given us a mandate, they've given us a 5-year mandate. They gave us a mandate because we have a plan. We will implement that plan. And we have to get the confidence of those that believe that we are not capable of implementing that plan. We do have a plan, and we promise to the people of South Africa that that plan is what we're going to implement. But we'll continue to listen to the people, because one of the reasons why we wouldn't walk out of something like this, and we know the analysts, they've made their commentary during the elections. We're not happy with some of them, we're happy with some of them, but that's what democracy is about. And we'd like to welcome the EFF to the real politics. South Africa is getting to the real politics of the world. And what we can do is simply to make sure that we strengthen our own institution as the African National Congress, where we have the weaknesses, strengthen our government, improve. And you know, where people keep talking about the fact that we are not concerned about corruption, that's absolutely not true. We wouldn't have put the institutions in place to deal with that corruption if we were not. I don't want to go into the issue of Nkandla because it keeps on repeating itself all the time. It's also not true to say that we're not concerned about the money that was spent in Nkandla. We are very much concerned. We've said it so many times that the figure for us was quite high. But we're saying that there are institutions that we, as the African National Congress in government, have put in place to deal with that. And therefore, we will see when we get back to Parliament, when we get back to government, people will judge us as to whether the reports that have come out as far as Nkandla is concerned, we are not able to deal with. It's also not true to say that the president has not been concerned about it. He has been concerned about it. He's answered the questions in Parliament. There is a report that he has to deal with. So let's look at what we're going to do in the next 5 years. But what is important? The people of South Africa has given us another mandate of 5 years. And let's forget about the fact that this is simply because of our history. Yes, we're proud of our history. We liberated this country. Nobody can take that away from us. We've also spent 20 years in government. Those 20 years in government were first, they were lessons for us to learn how to govern because we never had the opportunity to do so before. So the experience of the 20 years is now going to give us an impetus to say, what are we going to do in the next 5 years? but we're saying, what are we going to do in the next 30 years? That's why we've got a plan. We've got a plan for job creation. We've got a plan for improving the economy. And let us also say, improving the economy can never be a responsibility only of government. Government has to play a greater role, but the ordinary citizens of South Africa also have to get up and say, in my space where I am, what is it that I can do to improve myself, rather than just thinking that only government can do. Business must wake up to this reality. The African National Congress cannot remain a buffer between business and the poor people. Business must also come onto the table, because this South Africa belongs to all of us who live in it. It cannot be that we all live in it, but the responsibility of managing and running it only remains with the African National Congress. Let's all pull our resources together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's continue with that same breath now. Thank you so much. I'm going to take some of the questions on the floor. Prof. Friedman, I know you wanted to quickly react to what happened before the break. So if you can, could you react to that and give us your opinion? And then we're going to go to table number 2. We have Terence Sibia. Terence wants to speak to us about something that Ms. Zulu also touched on, the economic situation in South Africa, saying that we're again on the brink of a ratings downgrade. So something that we can look at in just a moment. So we're going to go to table number 2 in just a moment to speak to Terence. But perhaps if you can, just give us your quick answer.
Thanks, Ayanda. Look, I think we've just witnessed something which some of us have been very worried about for the last 6 months. It's very interesting to me that at this particular discussion, when you single out political parties, you do not ask for the first response from the party who got 62% or from the party who got 22%. You ask for the party who got 6%. And the reason you do that, I used to think there were all sorts of complicated reasons. The reason you do that, as we've just seen, is that if you don't do that, the party that got 6% will bully you, as they've just done this morning.
Tantrum.
The other thing I find very interesting, and that's been another pattern which we have to be concerned about. Walkouts look very glamorous, okay? Bear in mind that the reason for the walkout is that Mr. Mpofu made all sorts of claims which most of us on this panel can refute, and he's not here when the refutation happens, so he doesn't engage in the debate. Professor Siepe says he wants to criticize the EFF. Mr. Mpofu and his colleagues are not here to listen to Professor Siepe's criticism. And I think that we need to get away from this fetish which the mainstream has, that 6% is a majority. 6% is not a majority, and if those people in red berets want to be treated as they demand to be treated as the majority party in this country, they must win more than 51% of the vote. And until they do that, they need to be treated as another political party, and we need to get back to that. I just want to make one other point in response to something Lindiwe Zulu said, because I think it's very important, and it relates to something Ralph said. The people, unfortunately, have not spoken. And what I mean by that is not that the election wasn't free and fair. Of course, the election was free and fair. I think if you do the math, and it doesn't mean we have a defective democracy, this is the case all over the world. The ANC didn't get 62% of the adult population. It got 35% of the adult population. Because if you bear in mind how many people were registered and how many people actually voted. Now, obviously, the DA got 12%, and the sovereign representatives of all the poor got 3.5%. But I think what we need to bear in mind is that while that is perfectly legitimate, and while it's the way in which democratic politics is conducted, it means that there is a gap between political leadership and the citizens, which needs to be fulfilled. So I don't think there's any room for complacency about the situation at the moment. There are millions of South Africans who do not have a voice, and it's an urgent priority to ensure that those millions become part of the political conversation.
Indeed. Well, let's get the ball rolling now so we don't get sidetracked by the 6%. Let's go to table number 2. I believe it's Terence. Could we get a microphone to table number 2? Terence wanted to speak about the country being on the brink of a ratings downgrade. I think it's Dr. Terence Sibia. My apologies for omitting that title.
Your apology is accepted. Good morning to the panel and to all of us in this room. This is quite critical for me to try and close this gap, this disconnect between our own political landscape and the rest of the reality in the world. We are a political economy, I accept that, but I'd like to hear from the panel. And my question is, once again, we're on the brink of a ratings downgrade, which has all kinds of implications. Already our economic growth is sluggish. as a country, close on 2.5%. However, the rest of the world is where we borrow our money from and where we raise debt. What does this new cabinet, assuming there will be a complete reshuffle, need to do, and reasonably quickly, to keep us connected to the economy of the world? From the panel, what do you think, as President Zuma makes his decision around how he's going to stimulate this economy, what needs to happen for us to remain relevant to not only the Pan-African economy, but a global economy in a broader sense?
Doctor, I'm just going to ride on your question as well. Prof. Habib, if you could answer that. And also, on top of that, say if you could be a little birdie in President Jacob Zuma's ear and whisper which cabinet ministers to chuck out, which ones to keep and which ones to move around, what would you tell him? So if you could address the doctor's question there, and also off the back of that, just tell us how you would maneuver things.
Well, I think there's an interesting dilemma. If you have this cabinet, this is the dilemma you confront. If you just simply listen to the business community, the message coming out of the business community is focus on growth, get growth going, and if you get growth going, the rating agencies will reward you and they will not give you a downgrade. That's the message if you read Business Day. I think it's an incorrect message, because what it also you should be concerned about, which the EFF is a manifestation of, but many others are, is the marginalization in the society and the levels of inequality in the society. In the last 20 years, for every single year, we've had inequalities increase. And what that has manifested itself in a variety of ways, but in the kinds of demands that we're getting in labor strikes, the violent nature of the labor strikes, the violent nature of service delivery protests. We have a polarization in our society as a result of this. And that also creates the sense of instability that frightens investors. So the trick is, how on the one hand do you appeal to investors and get growth going while simultaneously addressing the inequalities in our society? And this is the difficulty. Dealing with poverty does not deal with inequality. It's important, and growth is important for dealing with inequality. But the dilemma is this, that if you're poor people and you get employment going at the bottom, and if you get industrial targeting and education, and as people get jobs and we start dealing with poverty, and as the economy goes, the guys on the top grow faster, because they have something that the guys at the bottom don't have. They have assets, they have stocks, they have bonds, they have property. And so often as you deal with poverty, inequality is this thing. Now what you've got to do is grapple with that dilemma. And there are historical experiences where we have dealt with it. So for instance, Western Europe dealt with it, or Southeast Asia, or most recently Brazil. We have to learn those experiences and say, how do we get growth going? But how do we also deal with the inequality divides? Because if you don't deal with the inequality divides, you don't deal with the instability in the economy and in the marginalization that is happening. That's the fundamental trick. So the question is, how do you do it? One of which is you need a conversation. You need the kinds of people that you have who articulate the emphasis on growth, Praveen Gordhan and party, but you also need people like Rob Davies and others who are articulating the importance of industrial targeting, of getting employment, etc. The fundamental question, however, is instead of people singing two hymns, you need a single hymn. What you need is somebody saying, here are the trade-offs. Here is what we require. What we need to do is understand what the growth dimensions require, what the inequality, addressing the inequality dimensions, and these are the trade-offs that need to happen. You're going to make some concessions here. You're going to make some concessions there. And that requires somebody with the authority to get Praveen Gordhan, Rob Davies, Ibrahim Patel, Malusi Gigaba, and others to sit around the table and trade around these questions, and to get business and labor to trade. And that requires somebody at the level of the president and the deputy president. My hope is Jacob Zuma hasn't done it thus far. Perhaps through Cyril, we could have that conversation happening. It's not one or the other. It's how do you strike the balance between the two?
We've spoken now about stimulating the economy, but let's talk about stimulating democracy in South Africa. Mr. Masaka, I'm going to ask you to answer this question for us. We touched on it a little bit earlier about what best serves the interests of democracy in our country. Having lots of smaller little parties, or perhaps getting those parties to cash in their chips and decide to throw in their lot with the likes of the DA or perhaps even EFF or the IFP, the stronger parties, so that we can have a formidable opposition force going. Now, I want you to have that in mind as we do go to table number 14. We have members of the NFP under the leadership of Zanele Magwaza Msibi. They are here today, a sea of orange I told you about a little bit earlier. We're going to ask them whether or not they're happy with their showing in these elections. They came below the IFP. I might just add IFP, they're coming in 4th position. But they did manage to get 6 seats, I believe it is, in Parliament. So just a quick word or two from one of you, whether or not you're happy with your performance, or are you considering coalitions, or, like I said earlier, cashing your chips and siding with one or two of the bigger parties?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. One, I think the National Freedom Party has just laid a foundation. We appreciate the 1.58% we've got. We believe that South Africa Constitution embrace multi-party democracy. Will make our voice heard. But like other political parties, we are pointing fingers to media. We have no space to advertise our party. Like for instance, the New Age paper, we're just giving us no space at all. But today we are counted as party that is in Parliament. Hopefully, we are going to build on it. Coming to the question, we are not contesting this election and competing with the IFP. We're just contesting the election as the NFP. So what we have got as the NFP, we appreciate it. But we have reached that because we have nothing to lose. We lost nothing. We contest for the first time and we got 6 seats in the National Assembly. We believe we'll build from there. And we believe that we've got votes throughout the province, such as this one. In Gauteng, we got 0.49%, which means that if we had resources, we're going to get at least a seat in the province. But we'll go back to our structures, we'll go VD by VD and mobilize support. Hopefully, we are going to make it, and we will increase maybe representation in municipality in 2016 and also register our representation in the legislature come 2019. We believe that we could achieve that because as the party that is 3 years old, we have structures in place starting from the national down to the branch level. Thank you.
My apologies to you again because I didn't ask you to introduce yourself, but you wouldn't happen to be Nelson Mailula?
No.
That's the gentleman seated next to you.
It's Nelson Mailula. I'm Peggy Kombi, the provincial chairperson of the NFP.
My thanks to you both. And I do have a question from you, Mr. Mailula, about the coverage of NFP. I hope you're keeping track of all of this, because I'm testing your memory now. So your question is with regards to coverage of the smaller parties. There's also a similar question from Ondile Gedama in table number 10, basically wanting to speak about how analysts rate the different parties and how they get the coverage on television. So it's all much ado about the smaller parties. So I think we can also fit it into that question.
Thank you very much. As you rightfully pointed out, my name is Nelson Mailula, from the National Freedom Party, NFP, not I, NFP. I just had to make sure that... No, look, ours is sweet and sour. Sweet in that, as my leader rightfully mentioned, that we have not lost a thing, because we came from 0 to 6 seats in Parliament, National Assembly, and I think that is something to be proud of. and it is, of course, something we can build on going forward. So
I think
we're
you're-
quite
you're-
happy overall.
You're making the most of that airtime you wanted from the new age. Let's quickly get to the
Okay.
question, please.
The sour in that we will find it very, very difficult as the NFP to actually say the elections were free and fair. It's going to be very, very difficult because there has been irregularities, anomalies, shenanigans insofar as the IEC is concerned. If one is to talk about ballot boxes, which were found in places like your Diepsloot, Brakpan, Springs. Ballot boxes were found in Alexandra in a car marked the African National Congress. That should tell a story, and surely that's not a good story to tell. Now, on the question of the IEC, one is not going to dwell much into it because I think most political parties are swimming in the same boat, and insofar as that is concerned. On the question of the media, like we mentioned, we as the NFP seem a little hard done by because, and we've been wondering, how do these ratings happen by both the New Age and analysts over there? Because in the run-up to the elections, we've always been hearing of the EFF being given so many percentages, ahang nog al, so many percentages. NFP was never mentioned at all.
Okay, so you're lamenting the fact that the ratings were never forecast for the NFP and also some of the coverage. I'm quickly going to ask table number 10, Ondile Kedama, also to just speak quickly, 10 seconds. You're also wanting to weigh in on the debate of the smaller parties, the coverage and voter education when it comes to the smaller parties. Yes, we can hear you.
No, thanks. I don't know if I'll be able to spend the 10 seconds. But clearly, nature doesn't allow vacuum. I can see the seats of EFF have been occupied. I end up quickly. If you look at the coverage, I think it has been very difficult for SABC, for example, as a public broadcaster, to strike a difference. And I would want you at some point to look at that, because it is something that, for me, is very much unusual. Prof is talking about the 6% of this organization and the 33% of this one. Are you going to say to me they will be afforded an equal space in the media? Because for me, that is very much impractical, because the footprints are not the same and all that. But lastly, quickly, I wanted to raise the issue of youth and democracy. Clearly, for me, one issue that I could be raising if I had time, it is whether voter education is enough, because the social media campaign as alluded and aligned to youth, for me, it was not necessarily an issue that one could rely on. So for me, voter education is something that has to be continuous, whether physical or through other platforms and so on. Thanks, sir.
Thank you so much. That was as brief as you possibly could. Political analyst Ralph Mateja, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on the debate of the smaller parties. What serves the interests of our democracy best, having all these smaller parties or perhaps having them come together? So that's the crux of it. You heard the lament from the NFP. You've heard the lament when it comes to coverage. I'm also going to ask Prof. Sepe to share the comment on that very briefly.
Okay. Congratulations to the NFP for a good showing at National. But if it wasn't for the numbers from KZN, you would be not where you are. So it was a good calculation. You brought in the good numbers from the bigger province that brings in good numbers, so you can build on that. But the problem I have with South Africa's opposition parties is that they seem to think they're entitled to the opposition space, that they shouldn't be subjected to a critical review. It's like being an opposition, just earn yourself that noble contribution to the democracy. You don't even have to make a case for it. And I think this is driving this message. We have seen also from the DA intimating on the idea that you need a much consolidated opposition. Other smaller oppositions are actually stifling the opposition camp. My idea is that you cannot artificially construct the opposition. And the view that you need only one opposition, all of them have to just cash it out and perhaps join the official opposition, whichever way you construe that. It's based on the idea that this opposition do not represent certain sect or certain groups or communities within society. I think the reason why we have this number of opposition is because they are still largely a reflection on political identities and the way in which the societies also wish to be represented. Take, for instance, EFF. Whatever percentage that they have, they do represent a particular view within society that require that airing. So if you start saying that they are better off amalgamating with the DA, you are actually totalizing South Africa's political identities. I think we should be patient to allow for the opposition to crystallize naturally on their own until they get to that point. If they do, I don't know how long it's going to take, that you do have one or two of the opposition. But at this point, to try to drive the message that you need a single opposition, it is to cut South Africa's politics to say the most important part of South Africa's politics is to ensure that you maybe defeat the ANC. I think the narrative of South Africa's politics should be beyond the ANC. It cannot be framed on just building the opposition with the sole purpose to just defeat the... What do you do then when the ANC is no longer in power? I think there are bigger objectives in this society. There are more interesting or defensible objectives when it comes to representation than just building that strong single opposition. So I think where we are now, we should let it as it is. We should not artificially try to construct some kind of an opposition or unify the opposition. And just like what happened with COPE, those opposition parties that are actually occupying the space that they do not deserve, they'll be kicked out, as it is the case in the open market, where companies that are not performing well, they get crowded out. COPE got crowded out because it was wasting that space. It's going to happen to a point where maybe you start seeing that idea of a formidable opposition. I don't believe in that. I believe in diversity. I think that South Africa is a diverse society, which is reflected in the difference in terms of the oppositions that you have.
The survival of the fittest, the nature will take its course. Prof. Seba, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with Ralph. The issue of entitlement that you often hear from the opposition is something that they may need to look into, and especially when they refer to the media. And I'm glad that somebody mentioned Ahang. Ahang was able to seize the space, but what can be learned from this exercise is that occupation of media space and even buying that media space is not going to translate into the votes. But it is very important. And this is where I also think that the ANC, even though it ran a good campaign on the ground, one of its weaknesses was to enter or to cede the space largely to the opposition. Because most people, if you read the media, especially if you're an outsider, you would have found much absence of the ANC in terms of their good stories. And you would actually think that a party that is so attacked day in, day out is likely to would be lucky if it gets 2%. But that also reflects our media, but probably it has become almost activist in its approach. And it is that media that also sells this idea of that democracy is best served when you have a strong opposition, as opposed to the whole notion of diversity. But I would also say, given what most people say is a decline of the ANC, which in effect is really not. If you look at 20 years, there's not been a major shift. I would, if I was in the opposition, I'll worry that if the party went into this election limping as it did, with all these other challenges that it had, with disunity within the alliance and within itself, etc. And the party now that says we're going to take stock, we're going to study every voting district, we're going to look at our own performance, then I'll worry that it is most likely that it will do better next time. So if you're opposition, you have to up your game. But there's also something that you were asking about the rating agencies. One of the things that has come that is also positive in this country is a ruling party that now sees beyond 5 years. The fact that you have an agreement, of course, there's some people who disagree within the Labour front around an NDP, begins the conversation that Adam was talking about, that what is most important is not formulas, is engagement. And society, democracy is served best when there is that level of engagement. And there are certain positives that have emerged from the NDP that the government says it's going to be dealing with. One is the issue of dealing with corruption. And that one of the policies that it has put, which if is effected, would take us to the next level and also will be positive to the ANC, is this notion of prohibiting public servants from doing business with the state, making sure that you pay the small business or any contractor with the state within 30 days on time.
Serious issue
and dealing with the issue of organizational efficiencies. Yeah. These are some of and also managing this tender system, because part of the corruption has occurred in that. But most importantly is to get the right people. We can understand that cadre deployment has been abused. So it is very important that people who are capable are actually put in there. It's not only about having the right politics, it's also about having the right politics and the right attitude.
And accountability. Yeah, accountability, very important there. Thank you so much for that analysis. Let's now hear the voice of the church. The church, somewhat quiet. We often see them as the moral compass of South Africa. You know, the sayings, moral decay, and whether or not we can boost morality when we're seeing so many people on the upper echelons, not only of government, but also of civil society, being seen in the media for all the wrong things. So let's hear from Bishop Zondo now. I don't see where he is at the moment, but I do understand he's here. I'm going to dub him the voice of the church for the morning. I'm going to ask you to stand up, please, Bishop, if you are with us, and perhaps you can give us your response and your reaction to what you've heard and seen today, Baba.
A very good morning to the panelists and the church. As you know that I come from the church. You caught me off guard. I was still enjoying what the educated people were talking about. You are talking about the moral decay, the moral issues. It's a burning issue among the religious group. If we had the power, I'm not sure if we are going to have it in this new term of the African National Congress, I would suggest that the moral regeneration program must be given to the traditional leaders and the religious leaders. Let them become the custodians of the moral regeneration of this country. Because you cannot put the corrupt people in place to lead the righteous people while they are corrupt. That is the cry of the community and the religious leaders outside there. The other concern that I have, as far as we talk about this lot of political leaders that are mushrooming like churches, is that our people, it seems as if we don't have hope in any other leadership in our country. Meaning, we have the leadership problem in this country. If that can be fixed, I believe we can have a brighter and prosperous South Africa. I thank you.
My thanks to you. I was getting a bit worried there. I know men of God, they don't like to put the mic down. But thank you for keeping it so concise. They rap about 3 times. I'm about to put the mic down. And in conclusion, and finally, and then 20 minutes later, that's when they close. Thank you so much, Bishop, for that bit of inspiration and way forward on the moral issues. But I now want to speak about this current administration, or the new administration that we're going into. There have been some talks on the office corridors that now this is President Jacob Zuma's exit clause, if we can say that. This is just ceremonious, that he is on his way out, and that the focus will no longer be on him as the individual, will no longer be on Nkandla, on perhaps the Gupta plane landing, but now we'll turn to the next leader who's going to come up. We've already started seeing the FF's Julius Malema saying, yes, President Jacob Zuma is bad. However, Mr. quote, Buffalo, as he likes to refer to him, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, is X, Y, and Z. So we're already seeing opposition parties turning their attention away from President Zuma more towards who could take his place come the elective conference in 2017. Prof. Habib, I'm going to ask you to speak to us. Are we going to see more of a focus now towards whoever could take over from President Jacob Zuma, starting to build that person or pull them down from the opposition parties?
You see, I think that is likely to happen, and I think that there's a danger in this, because what it could land up is if you land up focusing on who the next leader is going to be, and a faction fight begins within the ruling party between, let's say, Cyril Ramaphosa, advocates of Nkosazana Zuma, and what you could land up doing is detracting the ruling party from focusing on the fundamental questions of the day, addressing the kinds of big challenges that people were talking to. Stephen Friedman spoke about the importance of getting governance going at the municipal level and at city level. If you get detracted from that, then there's the real problem. My hope is that what will happen is that you allow the positioning of leadership to happen through the actual program that is required to be undertaken by this government. And that's the big agenda. My gut feel is there is still, at least until 2016, some time to consolidate a programmatic agenda. If you do that well, as President Zuma could do, and establish the parameters for focusing on the programmatic questions, then you might actually be able to ensure that the succession debate that is likely to emerge within the ANC happens in a democratic, in a productive way, rather than in a kind of faction fight where you start denigrating each other and trying to advance each other on the top of somebody else. So that, for me, is the hope. But it is, if you've just seen how things have occurred over the last couple of years, there is an explicit danger that the ruling party can once again degenerate into faction fights where one or other party is positioning themselves for 2017. And if that were to happen too soon, then the programmatic issues, the fundamental questions that we should be focusing on, will be derailed, and that will be to the loss of South Africa as a whole.
And we'll speak about the local government elections in just a moment, but let's stay on that topic of possible fighting. Prof. Siepe, I see your hand. Prof. Frieden, you've been quiet for a while. I want to find out from you, who should we be looking at when it comes to that? I mean, the journalist in me is always looking for a scoop. So we have the likes of the young people saying they want fresh blood, perhaps your Malusi Gigabas. We have the women saying that it's time that we see a woman leader take up a very dominant position. And then you have allegations of people from KZN are possibly mooting for their particular leader to come forth again from their ranks there in that province. Is it too soon to tell, or can we start speculating?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you slightly by saying that I think we should care less about who and far more about what. And what I mean by that is, if you're a South African and you're concerned about what this election result means for your future, I think we're far too obsessed with personalities. There's this kind of assumption that the current president of the country created every single problem we have, and all we have to do is remove him and then all the problems will go away, which is clearly not true. What do we need to look at over the next while or so? I think Adam is absolutely right. I think the problem of factionalism is a real problem, and that's why I've said that I think one of the messages of this election is that what happens inside the ANC over the next 3 or 4 years is going to be more important than what happens in the other political party space, because if the kind of scenario that Adam is talking about plays out, well, we could have another split in the governing party, and we've seen that can change our politics. But there are two issues which I think we need to be focusing on here. The first one is that I think that the question that Terence raised about the economic future is less about individuals than how we deal with it. I am very interested that the ANC election manifesto has, I think, for the first time, an attempt to start a negotiation on the economy. It has 5 ideas which the ANC wants business to adopt. It has 4 or 5 ideas which it's prepared to offer. That's a bargaining position. And I think the real issue we need to be asking is that negotiation going to happen? Because that negotiation, and there I do agree with my colleagues, that negotiation is the only way we can get out of the situation we're in at the moment. The other thing I'm going to be looking at, which I think is very interesting, is yes, the ANC is in no trouble nationally. It's going to, on this performance, it's going to win the next 2 elections easily. But of course, we all know, and colleagues have been talking about this, that in the major metros, the ANC is in trouble. I think that is very important for governance in those areas because it puts an important tool in the hands of residents in those areas, and poor people in particular. There's lots of evidence around the world that when party competition gets more fierce and poor people are organized, they have opportunities they haven't had before. So I think we need to be looking at Tshwane, we need to be looking at Nelson Mandela Metro, we need to be looking at Joburg and seeing if we're going to have more active citizenship and more citizen influence in those areas because political parties have to start worrying about people's votes in a way they didn't before.
Okay, Prof. Sepe, the next question will be directed at you, but I know that you're going to have something to add on to that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to ask you to just keep that thought, and then this next question as well, perhaps if you can link it to the answer there of the first one. Table number 1, we have Siphamandla Zondi. Siphamandla wants to speak about perhaps internal squabbles within the Democratic Alliance and allegations on the media front, much ado about whether or not Helen Zilla's apparent darling, Musi Maimali, is being pitted against Lindiwe Mazibuko, and whether or not she was pushed or she jumped herself. But yes, please do ask that question.
Sorry, none of us can answer this question because we're all going to Harvard for a year.
Are you all going to Harvard? I want to go to Harvard too then.
Thank you very much, Ayanda. Certainly the DA has done very, very well in this election. And part of its advantage, in my view, has been its ability to present a very cohesive strategy and action in regards to whatever aim they had. Worked very, very nicely, and under Zille they have brought diversity in the leadership and speak with one voice. But the news around Lindiwe Mazibuko suggests that may be more appearance than reality, that there may be underlying difficulties that Zille has had in trying to move the party in any particular direction in a real way. Given the fact that so many people are investing in its becoming an alternative to the ANC, what messages does this Lindiwe Mazibuko think itself, and how the DA is responding to it, with Zille almost saying Mazibuko was anyway going to lose an election and all of the country? What does that say about the message of the DA as more morally superior, more politically mature, more cohesive, and so on and so on? Thanks.
There we go. Prof. Sepe.
Let me start first with the question that was raised by Bishop Zondi. There is a narrative in this country that talks about the leadership deficit. And I've heard that coming from people who have actually been embarrassed by this election. I mean, if you were to read anything that is written by Mampela Rampela, she talks about the leadership deficit. You look at Terra, you look out. So there's always this tendency, and we seem to be buying into it. When in fact, the challenges that we face are much more complex. And this is why what is being proposed by both strongly by Adam and Stephen is that the solution would lie in negotiations. And what you also find in the ANC is also a certain degree of humility. When they even say, in terms of job creation, they talk about job opportunities. What they are saying is that we're not even sure. We want assistance. So the whole notion of humbling yourself to saying we want to be assisted is actually a good one for the country. Now, coming down to Helen Zille and Lindiwe Mazibuko, I think Helen Zille has been very consistent. And if you remember that when she put her first cabinet, it was all white until there was a protest by COSATU. Then you start seeing a sprinkling of black and colored people in the cabinet, but it remained all male. And it's interesting that the ANC never tried to raise the issues around that. And there was the issue also even calling black people who have moved there to be refugees. That indicates a particular mindset not to have that sensitivity and to be stubborn about it until almost every editorial pages started condemning her for that. Then with Musimamane, it's actually, even before we talk about Musimamane, it was also with Agang, because it explains how she herself has positioned, how she treats black people. She talks about how great Mampela Rampela is, how she is a global brand, she's a great academic and all that, and a great businesswoman and all that. And yet, 2 days after they had met and had that kissing spectacular event, she says, I'm giving her an ultimatum. How do you give somebody who's supposed to be so great an ultimatum? If she can give Mampela Rampela an ultimatum, what more about Lindiwe? What more about the Musimamane? So the message that she gives is that you are only useful to me for as long as I want you to be of service to me. And this is actually unfortunate. But also by trying to parachute another leader and not looking at those, it's almost like you are keen to be renting a black. And we've seen that happen quite a lot of times. And I do think that she could have relied on the many other black people within the DA and have nourished and supported them. And this notion of trading an eloquent black from this one to that one is not the way to go to grow a party. But we should not take away the fact that she did make some inroads in the black community. I mean, having 6%, as she indicates, it's an achievement.
We'll speak about race politics a bit more in just a moment. I see Prof. Habib wants to mention, but I just need to appeal to whoever is from any political organization. I may not have taken note of you. We are fast running out of time. I'm going to ask you to please stand up, lest we be accused of sidelining anybody. If there is something that you wanted to say, if you are from a smaller political party, please do stand up as Prof. Habib answers this question, and I will come to you immediately so we can air your dirty laundry as well if you're from a particular political party. But Prof. Habib, let's hear from you, and then we'll also just check in with the ANC's Lindiwe Zulu in just a moment.
I just want to come back to what Sipho was talking about in Sipamandla. I mean, we've known for a long while that the DA is divided. And it's fundamentally divided on how to approach the big fundamental questions of our day. Now, it often sometimes masks that. But we do know that if you spoke to the old Tony Leon wing or the Helen Zille wing, that they were reflecting very, very different positions on a variety of issues. And you've seen some of that come out in places like Business Day and New Age and a number of newspapers. The striking thing about how this particular, initially I thought both Lindiwe and Helen Zille managed this very well. Because what they said is initially they said she had decided to move on. Clearly there was some evidence, because if you applied to Harvard, you can't just decide now to apply or in January. You must have at least thought about it a year ago. You would have gone through the processes, etc. So for some time, clearly Lindiwe was thinking about this. But then the statement yesterday or the day before about she would have lost anyway, that's shocking. Because what it does show now is a leader who's losing touch, who on the one hand had managed this very well, and then suddenly began to target a particular individual. And then it raises the kinds of issues that Sipho is raising. And there is suddenly credence being paid to, can Helen Zille manage her party? Is she an authoritarian leader? Is she allowing a variety of viewpoints to be heard? Is she behaving in ways that demand that people, does she silence people who don't follow? And I think that her own behavior over the last 2 days suddenly gives far more credence to that than initially appeared about a week ago when Lindiwe first raised the issue that she's moving on. And I think, if you ask me, I think it's a combination of both. I think Lindiwe had been thinking about it, but I think her mind may have been made up by the pattern of behavior that's seemingly emerging within the DA.
We'll leave it there for now. The cracks are beginning to show. If anything on Twitter is anything to go by, then you do kind of see a glimpse of Helen Zille, I think at her fiercest.
That's right.
On Twitter. But let's hear from the ANC now for a moment or two. Ms. Lindiwe Zulu, been sitting back, listening to discussions on moral regeneration, on issues of corruption that have been raised. We really have about 4 minutes left of the show. So in about a minute, if you can just quickly give us a wrap from your side.
Well, I thank you very much. As I said much earlier, that one of the reasons why we come to such discussions is because we want to continue to be able to listen. And we have listened to what has come out here, not only myself sitting here, African National Congress people out there listening, and the whole of South Africa, those that have the time are listening. The one thing that I would like to conclude with is, one, this country cannot be run on any anger. Irrespective of where the anger is, even anger coming from some of us who believe that, we did so much for this country and we're being kicked left, right, and center, no matter how much we try. We need to engage, as Umfundis had said. The engagement has to be way bigger than the way it has been happening if we are to take this country forward. The other issue is, I think the IEC did a very good job. We must congratulate the IEC despite the challenges and the attacks that came through, some of which we will accept was very political, but that's not the space for us to discuss that right now. So we must give due where it is. They still have to run the next elections and the next election, so we must have confidence in them. The media, I think, it mustn't be said that we are just attacking the media as the African National Congress. The media has to play the role that is expected of it. It must be objective. It must also take responsibility of the fact that we are wanting to go to a country which is non-racial, non-sexist. And again, as I said earlier, that's a responsibility of all of us as citizens of this country.
Ms. Zulu, I'm going to have to interrupt you. My apologies, but thank you so much for coming out and paying attention to what the analysts have had to say. Again, apologies for cutting you short. Closing comments as briefly as possible. We did want to touch on the race issue. The fact that we still get surprised when we see a lady from the EFF, white lady at that, with a red beret, or perhaps in the AFP, if there's a white person there, or the ANC, I should say, in black, green, and gold, we sort of parade that person around. The camera will stay at that particular person. Race is still an issue in politics.
Of course it is. I mean, we've only been here 20 years, and so, I think there is progress being made. If you come to places like universities, you see the kinds of interactions that are happening. There's significant changes. At the same time, there's always, we take 3 steps forward, 1 step backward. I will end by saying, I think that any new cabinet has to deal with 3 issues: inequality and growth, and the balance. Corruption has to be taken seriously, and getting service delivery working. If you get those 3 things done, I think this country will move forward in quite a dramatic way.
Thank you so much, Prof. Habib. I'm going to speak to you, your closing comments. Mr. Ralph Mateja, very quickly.
Well, the most important thing for me, and particularly I think the next administration and the ANC should note, is that there is a growing disjuncture between electoral mandate expressed in terms of the percentage that you get. You have 62% of the votes, but there is a gap when it comes to the legitimacy of the party to implement policy. And Professor Bibb often talks about the social pact. The party needs to go and talk to people to make sure that its ability to implement policy does not get into this kind of confrontation that we have seen on the ground. They need to have a conversation beyond just flaunting the electoral majority.
It needs to trickle down to the bottom. Thank you so much, Prof. Siposi. If you can speak to us.
Yeah, I think the ANC needs to learn that it needs to reclaim the public space. It has ceded that. And when you do that, you seize also the ideological battle. But most importantly, I do think that also as citizens, we have a responsibility to make sure that this country succeeds. And our people, by coming in numbers, have actually affirmed our democracy. But one of the things that we did not talk about is also the right to be critical of every institution. There's a tendency in this country to think that the only institution that we must be critical of is government. And they've also been told, we've been told by some people
Yes.
that even Chapter 9 institutions are beyond critique. So we should learn
We'll
from
have
the
to save that
judiciary.
discussion for a different platform. My thanks to you again for having joined us, Prof. Siposiape. Thanks for your closing comments. Professor Friedman, we'll have to ask you to say the final word.
Well, if I was the governing party, I would bear in mind that if the governing party is complacent about this result, it will lose Tshwane, it will lose Nelson Mandela Metro, and it may well lose Johannesburg. And I think the lesson there is we need to have serious negotiation about our economic future, and we need to close that gap that Ralph has been talking about between the political process and the citizens.
We'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much. And I don't even know if I'm throwing back to Leanne in studio or saying a final goodbye, but nobody can blame or at least accuse the South African politics of being boring. This morning has been anything but. Thank you so much for having joined us for the last 3 hours. It's back to you in studio in Auckland Park. Leanne.